Welcome everyone to the FAQ Shack, the show where we tackle the questions you're most curious about.
So today's topic actually comes from one of you. A viewer, Alex from Ohio, asked us, what's the real story behind the Killdozer meme? And that is a fantastic question, so we're going to dive deep into that one. And hey, if you've got a topic you want us to explain, make sure you drop it in the comments below.
Yeah, if you've been on the internet at all, you've probably seen this guy. He's often painted as, and I'm quoting here, the last great American folk hero, a man driven to the brink who chose to fight back against an indifferent system. Basically, the story you hear is that he was a reasonable man pushed to do unreasonable things by a totally corrupt system.
But is that popular legend the whole truth? Is that what really went down? So let's peel back the layers of the meme and find out what actually happened in Granby, Colorado on June 4th, 2004.
All right, Section 1, a man's grievance. The story doesn't start with a bulldozer crashing through a wall. Nope, it starts much, much earlier, with a man, Marvin Heemeyer, and his small muffler shop in what was, a pretty quiet Colorado town.
And you gotta understand, this wasn't some sudden snap. This was a slow burn, a conflict that festered for over a decade. So look at this timeline. He buys his land back in '92. Things seem fine, but then in 2001, the town approves a concrete plant right next door, and that's where everything kicks off. For the next couple of years, he's in and out of court, losing appeal after appeal over zoning, access to his property, even sewer hookups. And then, in early 2003, after he loses his final appeal, that's when he buys the Komatsu bulldozer.
So you really have two completely different stories here. In Heemeyer's version, he believed the town was conspiring against him, trying to block access to his shop, ruined his property value, just completely ignoring him. But from the town's perspective, they saw a guy who just refused to follow the rules and who kept making these escalating, unreasonable demands. At one point, he apparently raised his asking price for his land from $250,000 to almost $1 million. So, two very different realities.
Okay, Section 2, engineering the MK tank. So, having lost in the courts, Heemeyer decided to take matters into his own hands. He went back to his welding shop and began this secret, incredibly meticulous project of revenge.
Think about this. For 18 months, a year and a half, he was secretly holed up modifying this bulldozer, turning a standard piece of construction equipment into something else entirely. And the engineering, it's honestly kind of mind-blowing. He called it the MK tank. Look at these specs. We're talking about a Komatsu D355A bulldozer, which is already 49 tons. But the armor system? It was a composite, half-inch steel plates with a foot of concrete poured in between. It was basically impervious to small arms and even explosives. And get this, no windows. He navigated using 7 exterior cameras, all in bulletproof housing, linked to monitors inside the cockpit. He had gun ports for 3 different rifles, and even onboard AC. The final weight was over 61 tons. Just incredible.
And this wasn't just about brute force, The level of detail is wild. He had armored camera housings, of course, but he also had compressed air nozzles to blow dust off the lenses so he could always see. He packed enough food and water for a week. And the most chilling part? The cockpit was completely sealed. Once he was in, there was no getting out. This was absolutely planned as a one-way trip.
All right, Section 3, Rampage in Granby. This was 2 hours and 7 minutes of pure destruction. On that afternoon, June 4th, 2004, Heemeyer sealed himself inside his creation and began his assault.
And as you can see from this timeline, the destruction was totally systematic. It wasn't random. At 2:30 p.m., he smashes right through his own shop wall. First target, the concrete plant, the source of the whole dispute. Then he moves on to the town hall. For the next hour and a half, he just methodically destroys 11 other targets. The newspaper office, a bank, even the private homes of people he had feuds with. The rampage only ended when the dozer got stuck in the basement of a hardware store he was destroying. And then, at 4:39 p.m., a single gunshot was heard from inside the cab.
The financial cost to this small town was just staggering. When it was all over, the damage was estimated at over $7 million. $7 million!
But it's not just about the money, right? It's the human cost. This quote from a Granby resident, Angie Kuchkowski, just says it all. It was scary. It was unreal. And while it's incredible that nobody else was killed, it wasn't for a lack of trying. He fired at massive propane tanks near a senior center. He leveled the local library just moments after kids had been evacuated. For the people there, this was absolutely terrifying.
So, Section 4, hero or terrorist? Because in the aftermath, with Granby literally in ruins, the story of Marvin Heemeyer started to change. It began to morph into this complicated legacy that sparks a pretty fierce debate even today.
And this question from another one of our viewers, Jamie, really gets to the heart of it. Jamie asks, it's insane how people idolize him. Was Heemeyer really a hero, a tragic figure, or just a domestic terrorist? That's the core of the debate, right? So let's look at the three main ways people see this whole thing.
Okay, first up, the folk hero. This is the version you see in a lot of memes. To a lot of people, especially online, Heemeyer is this symbol of the little guy fighting back against a corrupt system. They see what he did as a kind of justified last stand for people who feel powerless against bureaucracy. This viewpoint is really popular in certain anti-government circles.
Then there's the second viewpoint, the tragic figure. This one doesn't condone what he did, but it tries to understand the why. It suggests he might have had a psychological breakdown, that he was basically driven to despair by years of feeling wronged and being financially ruined. So this view isn't about making excuses for his actions, but about seeing the human element that led to the rampage.
And then, of course, there's the third perspective, the domestic terrorist. This argument is pretty straightforward. It focuses on the facts of what happened. He used essentially a weapon of his own making to inflict violence and fear on a community. It points to the massive property damage, the terror that residents felt, and the very real threat to public safety, all regardless of whatever his motives might have been.
So when you really look at it, the story of the Killdozer isn't just about a man and a machine. It's really about how we, as a society, think about rebellion, about grievance, and about justice. Heemeyer's legacy is kind of like a mirror. What you see in it, a hero, a tragic victim, or a villain, it often says as much about your own views on government and power as it does about the man himself.
And that kind of leaves us with this final, big question to think about. At what point does one person's individual grievance become a threat to all of society? It's a fine line between fighting for your rights and endangering everyone around you, and honestly, the Killdozer story forces us all to ask, where exactly is that line? Thanks so much for joining us here on the FAQ Shock.